Welcome to Mining Over Canada. Join the Canadian Securities Exchange and our partners in a first-hand look into our country's vast mining landscape.
Hi, my name's Serin. I'm Director of Listings Development with the Canadian Securities Exchange. I'm here today as part of our special presentation of Mining Over Canada during BC Week. I am joined by Michael Gray. He's with Agentis Capital. Thank you so much for joining us, Michael.
You're very welcome, Anna. Pleased to be here.
Michael, you are bringing some information to the table today we haven't covered yet, and it's pretty important stuff. So I'm going to let you tell us about your background and what you do now, but you essentially, your career path has mainly been around a mining analyst, and we haven't had the chance to chat with someone on this part of the sector yet. So I'm really excited to dive into a bunch of stuff, how we evaluate companies, how we complete how you complete all of your analyzing, who your marketplace is, who you're trying to provide this research to. And I also want to talk a little bit about institutional investors. That's something we haven't touched on much yet. We've talked so much about retail. So why don't you start off and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Okay, well, thanks again for inviting me. I'm a geologist by background. I've got a master's, and my basic career path has been 10 years with senior mining companies, largely in British Columbia exploring. And then a little bit of time in the Canadian Shield. Then I co-founded a junior mining company, ran that for about 8 years, and then pivoted to the mining analyst world. And I've been a mining analyst for about 15 years. Most recently, 10 years with Macquarie Bank. And in the last year, set up an independent research and advisory firm called Agentis Capital. So over the course of that time, have really learned and developed the skill sets to understand what good assets look like and what senior mining companies want to find. And in the junior environment, it was a matter of trying to find assets that could be sold to them, make a discovery and sell an asset to a producer. And so in the mining analyst chair, it's been a job of emulating the senior mining company in terms of looking for assets that were high quality and understanding the junior mining space in terms of what makes them tick. And so it's been really important to ultimately have the experience and skill set of being on both sides of the street, understanding the capital markets and, writing research essentially for institutional investors, fund managers, that are either specialists or generalists. And so over that period of time, evolved from covering exploration companies, new discoveries, right through to developers and then producers. And at one point, senior mining companies, a few senior producers in the gold space. But really my sweet spot was a little bit further down the food chain. So with Agentis now have developed a coverage list that focuses on, in large part, safe jurisdictions, and one of the batting cages is certainly British Columbia, with a number of companies covered specifically in the Golden Triangle. So that's part of my background. Along the way, one valuable step was I was president of the Chamber of Mines, which is AIM Association, now renamed. And that was excellent to gain. That was in 2004. Gain that contemporary experience to understand, especially in British Columbia, the environmental issues of the day, First Nations issues of the day, and apply that ultimately to understanding risk as a mining analyst.
I sit on the marketing and communication committee with AME. And, it's such a wonderful association, the work that they do, the people that are involved. And a big part of the reason I'm involved is I really would like to, I don't know if people are accessing them as much as they should be, because their content is incredibly valuable. And the people involved in the work they're doing is amazing. So, always suggest people go and at least check out their website and see what they're all about. I'd love to chat with you a little bit. There's so much in there I want to talk about. First of all, my big beef with people is not what you put in your due diligence process. It's have a due diligence process. Start there at least.
Well, as a mining analyst, it's it's a couple of things. One is meeting the management team, understanding their approach to the assets that they have and their outlook, and the way they communicate. And importantly, you know, after doing a desktop review, if the opportunity looks interesting enough, going through the technical report and things like that. But really, one of the key steps is getting a site visit in, to get the lay of the land and specifically understand whether the geology is good. Is it a favorable setting? Is it a setting that it can actually, if it's early stage, yield a high quality, best of breed deposit? Is it worth spending the time? And so that's the filter that I need to apply. It's one thing to do the work of the desktop, but to get in the field and actually see the assets, look at the drill core, understand the setting is critical. So that's where I think I really move the needle for fund managers, is I can sort the good geology from the bad and try to pick the winners in terms of the companies.
Can normal people like us gain access to your research? Is that available to the everyday person? How does that work?
No, we're really focused on institutional investors, so it's a little bit exclusive in that regard. You know, we're evolving the business model. Certainly, when I was with the banks, Macquarie Bank most recently, it was just to clients, so to speak. So our research is really dedicated to fund managers, the institutions, and a number of strategic investors, including producers.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I want to talk about fund managers and institutional investment, because we've talked a lot across the country about retail investment in the space. And a lot of our dialogue, keep in mind, has been around more the exploration side of things and junior companies. Obviously, the goal for most of them is to eventually find a resource and, you know, vend that to a mining operational company. So that's usually kind of the upside that people are looking for. You know, so that's more of a retail market. What kind of interest level capital do you see coming from the institutional side in the smaller exploration side of things? Does that exist at all, or is it more for the senior?
Yeah, well, it's the markets have evolved. If you asked me that question a couple of years ago, I would say very little interest for some of the earlier stage companies that were you know, fighting for survival and either had a project that had an interesting drill hole, but really wasn't liquid enough to matter, and we didn't have a market where the earlier stage companies were catching a bid, so to speak. So what's happened now is we've seen a market that has you know, changed significantly in terms of earlier in this year in 2020. You know, we saw gold price tick up. We saw the sentiment change in late April, early May, and all of a sudden, the junior mining companies, which deliver a tremendous amount of alpha in a portfolio, were in favor, and the earlier stage companies, especially with a hot drill hole with good communication from management, those type of stories could be financed by a select pool of institutional investors. And overriding this, one of the most notable features in the market has been Eric Sprott, who has single-handedly funded, I'm almost going to say, a third of the sector's earlier stage exploration. So the industry owes Eric a big thank you. He has been extremely important in terms of supplying capital and underpinning you know, critical mass of budgets for companies to actually make discoveries. So we're in a very special situation right now for the explorers, because the institutions at some level are willing to come down the food chain and invest in the exploration companies.
I did my best to try and get Eric to join us for this. you know, but obviously he's a very busy guy. He has, I know a bunch of CSC issuers have been funded by him recently. And, you know, it's not just the actual influx of capital that these guys need to be able to move forward. Obviously, it's very capital intensive program. It's not like other sectors where you don't need quite as much capital, and there rarely is revenue. So it's just the nature of the beast in the exploration sector. But also he brings a brand name with him. So if he's looking at regions or areas and he's putting money in, you know, he brings a lot with him, even just in people following him as retail investors. So I feel your sentiment on, you know, being thankful for people like that who are leading the way and bringing that kind of retail investor to the market.
Yeah, no, it's very important for the retail investor to see individuals have confidence. Rob McEwen's also been another important investor, not as big as Eric in this particular market, but he's also been a very important, and it does give retail investors confidence that there's going to be, as I mentioned, a sustained amount of capital go into a program that increases the odds of a discovery ultimately.
How did you get into mining?
Well, I've always, in terms of being a geologist, always been interested in the outdoors, and probably typical of a lot of kids had a rock collection, and was going into engineering in first year university, and I just found that I had more of a passion for what turned out to be an interpretive science. Geology is not an exact science. Engineering is a very exact discipline. And so that creative element that I didn't really know I had was a good fit with geology and ultimately mining. And the whole discovery process is, can be very exhilarating, right from prospecting and making a new surface discovery to actually drilling a hole that could be the start of an ore body. So that can be very intoxicating, and many geologists have a very long career and then continue on as in other parts of the business once they go out of the field. So it's been a lot of fun. And you'll hear from a lot of people you talk to that the characters and the individuals in the business are fascinating, and some of my best friends.
Absolutely. You know, the one thing, and that's why I threw that question at you, I've noticed of everyone we've spoken to, is the incredible amount of passion that people bring to this sector. Yeah. You're not in it if you don't love it. And if you don't love it, you should probably find something else to do, because it's a love-hate relationship. I mean, there's good markets and bad markets. And it's incredibly difficult what these people do when they're out in the field. I have so much respect for the work that they have to do, and have had a chance to chat with some of them. It's quite amazing. One thing I'd love to touch on a little bit, because this is a bit of an odd concept, and we've tried to talk to people about it and put our finger on what it looks like, but maybe you can add some color to it. What does it look like to evaluate a company or to evaluate a project? How do you go about that process?
Well, this could be a long conversation. I'll try and bring it into a relatively short answer. Is if the company has an asset of value and a resource you can possibly put in a discounted cash flow model, that's the best way to value a company, because you can actually look at the future cash flow streams. And as long as the project has some sort of critical mass or could be there, make the assumptions and build that financial model is really the key building block. And for most of the companies I cover and have full coverage and evaluation on, that's what underpins the majority of the value. The challenge is on a lot of these exploration companies, there is no asset of retained value in the ground yet. There is maybe a great drill hole, a great concept. That's where it becomes tougher. And so there is a need to still value those plays, and that can be on a enterprise value per ounce if they do have a resource, or if the analyst, which has a lot of latitude, can assume a potential resource and value that as part of their investment thesis. And the other aspect is certainly the land, apply some sort of value to the land, maybe scaled as to whether it's right next to a mine versus it's essentially moose pasture and just a concept. The other thing I do in some cases is apply some goodwill to management. If it's a management team who's done it before and had tremendous success, I will attach some goodwill to that management team. So those are some of the building blocks, and essentially the valuation is a sum of parts net asset value approach.
One thing that comes up a lot is management. This just seems to be such a fundamental component to the execution and success, potential success of any project. Yeah. Can you touch on that a little bit? How do you go and take a look at their past projects as far as a team? I mean, obviously at this point for you, you probably just know them all. But what would be your advice there? Because it really seems to be the cornerstone from an investment standpoint of making sure that good management's in place.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It is important to know, the good players versus the bad actors in terms of navigating management teams. Part of it is certainly the technical skill to go in and execute a good program, and it's relatively straightforward to assess a management teams in terms of their capabilities. But the other key thing is their ability to communicate and essentially understand the capital markets, and because they need to lower the cost of capital as they go forward. So if they can communicate powerfully and increase their share price, they can lower the cost of capital, and if there is a discovery to be made, limit the amount of funds and dilution it's going to take to get there. So for some management teams that are very technical and run by geologists and engineers, the capital markets and the need to promote, in the positive use of the term, is a bit of a blind spot and annoyance, and those companies can lag. Other companies that embrace the need to communicate at a high level, and especially at the right moment when they have a discovery to talk about, they can be very successful and advance their projects, accelerate exploration with more capital at a lower cost.
It really is that perfect marriage in this sector. You really need, the technical team, and you also need that capital markets team. I mean, one of the basics of especially the exploration program is the ability to go out and raise capital and raise equity, right? So you have to go, quite often they have to get on a plane and go out and travel around and, raise money for the project. And that's not necessarily in one body. You need the capital markets expertise as well as the technical team. And so management team is also it's also the composure, not necessarily just as a blanket statement of what's being brought to the table. Michael, so let's talk about BC. I mean, we're having this discussion under BC Week. Obviously, you have quite an immense knowledge of this jurisdiction. I know that there's been some changes over the past few decades that have made this a more favorable jurisdiction for investment and opportunity. Can you touch on that a bit?
No, absolutely, Anna. There's been a couple of game changers in the past couple of decades. And to me, number one is BC has better infrastructure, especially in the far north when it comes to power, hydroelectric. And I can maybe touch on that a little bit more later. And the second reason is the First Nations are starting to embrace responsible mine development and exploration. And this is driven by the mineral tax credits, the revenue sharing they get from producing mines that are in their territories. And so that's been huge in a number of cases. To all of a sudden, employment in the regions goes up for these First Nations, and the revenues come in to actually support the communities. That wasn't there 20 years ago. So that's a big part of it. Some other factors include 20 years ago, the land use planning in BC, there was massive battles between the NGOs and the mining sector in terms of access to land. There's been glacial retreat, which has opened up new prospects. There's been a government put in, first the Liberals, a mining plan that actually has put a framework for responsible exploration. And most recently, you know, the NDP's done a very, very good job to support the mining industry. So that's been really important in terms of our sector overall. And I think it's evolved and become a much more responsible sector. So what's happened, the culmination of that really impressed me was we've been labeled a tier 1 jurisdiction by Newcrest in particular. When they bought their 70% of Red Chris, on the conference call, their CEO called BC a tier 1 jurisdiction. This is back in 2019. We were nowhere near that status. We had pariah status back in the end of the 1990s.
Really?
Yes, absolutely. So this has been really important. Behind the scenes, there's been some great work by some of the associations, including the AIM, BC, and the Mining Association, to get us to this point. So that's really important. Those are some of the key building blocks. And again, it's really the First Nations, you know, having a collaboration agreements and this revenue sharing, and also the enhanced infrastructure.
You know, that's one thing in these discussions that we've had across the country is just understanding all of the moving parts that make a jurisdiction favorable. You know, and it's not just a particularly good spot for geology. There's a bunch of moving parts that will make, you know, a place favorable. And that's something that we talk about a lot in Mining Over Canada, because there's jurisdictions out there, you know, such as you know, the Congo or parts of Africa where you're taking on jurisdictional risk. Yep. That we benefit from greatly within our own borders here in Canada. Is there any region specifically in British Columbia you want to chat about?
Yeah, no, for sure. The Golden Triangle is an area in Northwest British Columbia that has you know, well endowed with favorable geology and has yielded some tremendous deposits and has been a loci for exploration in this cycle. And in the past year, it's attracted about 220 million of the 350 million roughly that's been raised. And wow. It's about 550 kilometers of the drilling have been conducted of the 850 kilometers conducted in BC. So it's a real hotspot. It's got favorable geology, in particular for copper gold deposits. And so it's got a special Philippines and Indonesia style of geology related to plate tectonics and a lot of magmatic activity. And so what it's done is through especially discoveries like Pretium's high margin Bruce Jack mine and the Red Chris deposit that's attracted investment from Newcrest, that porphyry copper gold deposit. It's attracted global attention, partly from that Australian investment. And I think the Australians are going to continue to be very, very interested in this world. But it's also the fact that there's been greenfield discoveries. GT Gold has found a brand new copper gold system, and Newmont's invested in that. You've got brownfield type projects like Skeena's Eskay Creek that's now been relooked at again by Skeena as an open pit versus an underground mine. And that was the highest grade, one of the highest grade gold mines in the world in the day, if not the highest grade gold mine. You've got brownfield plays like Ascot's Premier deposit will go back into production in a couple of years with a bit of a hub and spoke model. Will provide a mill that will actually take feed from various sources in the region, potentially beyond its own property. So it's a unfolding with a number of new deposits coming to the market to be mined, and also there's a pipeline of new opportunities vis-a-vis exploration, and large projects that are permitted, like Seabridge's KSM, that are waiting for the right environment. But those projects have been permitted, and it's very I guess there's a lot of alignment right now, in particular in that Golden Triangle area. And one big reason is because the Tahltan and the Nisga'a First Nations are essentially supporting responsible exploration and mine development.
What can you just define? I know this might not be easy in a quick interview, but could you define a little bit what responsible mining would look like?
Yeah,
responsible mining.
Yeah, well, it's largely doing the right things in terms of the communication piece, being transparent, and with the First Nations community and the local communities, being safe, being environmentally responsible, building to international standards. And BC is really leading the world on certain fronts now, certainly in tailings management facilities and their construction. So we've got a lot of best practices, and we've got a solid bar for permitting. So I think regulatory wise, we are channeled into a very high standard, but management teams have to be very serious about that in terms of being responsible and executing. And so a lot of it comes back to really good communication. And my view is that those are the teams that are probably going to be embraced by especially the First Nations to see the projects go forward if they're not permitted yet.
It's just so nice to see that those relationships are being fostered and are being well taken care of, because that's obviously very important to everyone. The other thing that we chatted about briefly, one of the benefits of certain regions that really get that desire for exploration is the development of infrastructure. Can you touch on that a little bit in the Golden Triangle?
Yeah, it's a great point. 20 years ago, there was an initiative to create Highway 37 power line, and it didn't really get going right away. And so we missed one cycle, those projects earlier in the 2000s. But once the Highway 37 power line got built, and that was able to electrify Red Chris and provide cheap power for the region, it has been a game changer. I think it's attracted some of the senior mining companies that are looking at larger scale potential projects and the possibilities. There's also been a lot of run-of-river projects built. So on a smaller scale, still feeding electricity into the grid, but also potentially providing power to brownfield plays like Skeena. As that project comes back into production as an open pit, it used to have half of its costs consumed by diesel power generation. So they will access that run-of-flow power that's near their deposit when and if that deposit comes back into production. So it really is a game changer to have that better infrastructure, in particular power, and to a lesser extent, road infrastructure.
Amazing. Well, listen, Michael, I can't thank you enough for all of your insights today. British Columbia is definitely kind of an amazing background in mining and so much great opportunity. And we need experts such as yourselves to help guide us through it. So thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. We will be joining, you will be joining us next week for our live event. So look forward to having further discussion. Thank you again.
You're very welcome, Anna. Pleasure.